Another thing we need to watch for when we're looking at properties is a simple thing like a handrail near the stairs. Now, every different area has the different guidelines about the handrails, and sometimes people have removed handrails so that they can get furniture up or down the stairs more effectively, and maybe they don't put them back. There was a lawsuit many years ago because the handrail wasn't there, the agent didn't point it out, the seller didn't say anything about it, the buyer moved into the property, his wife fell down and hurt herself, and he sued everybody. And it was decided in that particular area that handrails were not required, so it wasn't a problem. Well, when you look at the handrails, kind of shake it a little bit and see if it's strong enough, and just keep an eye on things. There are some front porches that have steps to get up on the porch that ought to have handrails but don't. And as people get older, they kind of enjoy having something to hold on to as they walk up and down the stairs. Now, of all things, probably the one thing we think the least about when we look at properties are garage doors. You need to start thinking about garage doors. The danger is not in the doors itself. It is the spring that is used to get that door up and down, so it takes some of the weight off of the person that's raising the door or off of the garage door opener that may be attached to it. You need to open the door and close the door. I say that for a simple reason. If you've ever been in a garage and watched one of those springs break, it goes flying. Now, luckily, they're installed with a cable through the middle, so it doesn't go that far, but it still can be a dangerous item. So you would want to take a look at that as well. Oh, just out of a simple mention here, make sure that the garage door openers stay with the house when you sell the house. I've had to chase down a couple of sellers to get them to bring the garage door openers back. They were on the sun visor of the car and they didn't even think about it when they moved out, and I had to go find them and get it back so they could have it. Another thing you'll want to watch for is pool and spas. It's an amazing thing that a lot of people go through. They buy a property that has a pool, and then somehow they lose interest after about a year or so. And if that pool is covered up, you're going to want to be careful when you lift that cover. One of my agents went out to show a property that had a pool that had a cover there, and the buyer wanted to raise the cover and see what the pool looked like. Thousands of mosquitoes flew out at the same time. The agent and the buyers took off running as fast as they could. The next time one of my agents went out to show that property, they got inside the front door just in time to see a rat running right towards them. They closed the door and decided they would never show that property again. Well, there's an argument in real estate on whether a pool adds value to a property or doesn't. In many cases, a high-end property needs a pool, and the people don't mind buying one with a pool because they can afford somebody to do all the maintenance to it. But in the more moderate-priced properties, a pool may not add any value to the property. But the people that buy it, they're going to at least want to make sure the thing functions, so you'd want as much information about that as you possibly could too. Now let's talk about something on a property that I've never had to deal with myself, and that is tennis courts. Some of you may play tennis. You know what the court's supposed to look like. You may go out there and look at the court. What are you looking for? Well, one of the things you're looking for is cracks to make sure that that tennis court has not been out in the weather so long that it's going to need some repair. Now, of all things, a lot of properties have some playground equipment installed there, and some of those are made out of wood. You may not have been watching the news in recent years, but there is a fear that some of that treated wood can actually cause health problems for the children playing on that. So you may ask the right questions. The seller may not know the right answers, but you at least need to think about the treated woods that were on that property. Talk to the buyer, let them know that they could get an expert out here if they're concerned about that kind of thing. Now, when you walk through a house, there may be cracks in the wall. They're usually near a door or a window. They're not usually just right in the middle of the room. I was at a house just this last weekend, and as you walked out to the garage, the door was hard to open and hard to close. And when you looked up at the corner of that door, there was a crack that ran from there to the corner of the garage itself. It's obvious they have a foundation problem either in the house or in the garage itself that would cause that kind of problem. Well, have you ever been in a property in which you walked across the floor and it felt like you were a camel going across the desert? I finally broke into the market where I could wind up getting the listings on properties that were foreclosed by lenders. It wasn't an easy market to break into. The first time a lender called me and said, go out there and tell us the property's what it's worth in its present condition and what it would be worth in its pristine condition. I arrived at the property because they were about to foreclose on it. I knocked on the door. There was no one there. It was obvious by looking through the windows no one lived there, so I obtained access. That's a nice way of saying I broke in. When I got inside the living area, I walked across that floor, and it was like I was going up and downhill every 2 steps. I ran outside, and I opened the access to the Pier and Beam Foundation to see what was going on. When they had built that part of the house, there had been some trees in the way. They had trimmed off the tree trunks and used them for part of the Pier and Beam Foundation. Because of the strong root system of those tree trunks, that part of the floor had not settled, but the man-made part had, and that was what was causing all the lumps on the floor there. I got back to the back wall where they'd done a flat roof addition, and the whole wall came down and it bowed out. I put my hand on it and pushed, and you could hear water sloshing inside the wall. I thought, oh my goodness, I've already spotted 2 septic tanks on the property. The water's not on, the electricity's not on. I don't know what's going to happen. I contacted the lender and I gave them the amount that this property could sell for, and it was the amount of the value of the land the house was sitting on. I didn't give the house any value at all. But I said if it's in pristine condition, it could sell for about $130,000. Now, the reason I gave them that number is this was about a 2,200 square foot house, 5 bedroom, 2.5 bath. But because of the way it had been added onto it, had weird traffic patterns, and it was definitely in bad shape. I didn't know what was going to happen, but the lender was ahead of me. They sent me a letter and they said, don't you let anybody buy this property unless they sign this form. The form was a waiver of rights to sue under DTPA. It named the lender and it named our company, and they said you cannot buy this unless you waive your rights. Now, I've talked to attorneys about that, and the attorneys have said it's not worth the paper it's written on. I don't care. I felt a little bit more comfortable to have that since that property was in such sad shape. I told the lender the property was worth about $49,900. They listed the property for $43,700. A family bought it at $43,700. It took them 6 months to do all the repairs. They listed it with us and we sold it for that $130,000 that I told everybody it was worth. I drove by that property last month just to see what it looked like. Somebody has bought it and torn it down, and they built another house in the place. That's called McMansion, just in case you haven't heard that term. That's happening more and more in older areas, that people are buying houses, removing the house, and then putting something there that they would like better to have. Now, when you go in and you look at a house, if it is a 2-story or multi-level, you need to take a look at the stairs also. Although there is a science to properly building stairs, some people don't follow that science. They just kind of do what they do. The step itself is not large enough for your whole foot to get on there. They may have put them at a steeper angle than they needed to be at. That handrail still could be missing and could cause more of a problem. Sometimes stairs are a bit of a danger themselves, so you'll be looking for that. Another thing you'll be looking at is fireplaces. Fireplaces in homes can be so different. There are going to be some that are wood burning, some that are gas operated, some that are both, and some that are non-functional. I was in another town called Fort Worth, Texas, and I was helping my boy look at houses, and in the classified ads, they kept putting in the abbreviation WBFP. I could not figure out what WBFP stood for. So finally, on one of the houses we were interested in looking at, I asked the listing agent, what's WBFP? They said wood burning fireplace. We don't use that in our community, so I didn't even realize that was a valid abbreviation that could be used, but they use it throughout Fort Worth with what they're doing. When you look at fireplaces, you're going to want to know if they're functional. You're going to want to know if something can be used. It wouldn't be a bad idea to find out how long ago it was cleaned out. Now, some people don't use chimney sweeps anymore. They use those special logs that they build a fire with, and that cleans out the soot itself. You need to watch the newspapers. There are some houses in which somebody builds a fire and the creosote inside the chimney itself catches fire and the whole house catches fire before it's over with. You don't want that to happen to one of your listings. Let the buyers know of the concern that you have. They may want to ask the sellers to have the place cleaned, or they may decide not to use the property at all. Now, another thing you may see in some houses is sagging beams. If the beams are sagging, it's got to be that there's some kind of weight distribution problem going on in that house. Pass it on to the buyer. Tell them to get an expert, and they can be concerned about it as well. Now, another thing you're going to look for is the electrical system. I'm not an electrician. I don't know when things work and when they don't work. I don't walk around the house and throw every switch on and off to see if they're working. I don't turn on the stove to see if it's functioning. But the seller knows all these things. The seller's going to put those into the disclosure itself. One of the most important questions that the seller needs to fill out on the seller's disclosure notice is about aluminum wiring. Those houses that have aluminum wiring in them have a tendency to that wiring could heat up and it could cause a fire. I live in a house that has aluminum wiring. All the light fixtures are labeled. Do not put any light bulb in that is over 40 watts. I live in a dark house. But I'm not going to put in a stronger light bulb, because if it heats up that wiring and my house catches fire, I just did a dumb thing by doing that. So be sure and look closely at the seller's disclosure notice concerning the electrical system. There may have been problems in the past. There may have been some rewiring done. Sometimes those electric plugs that are near a water source do not have that GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter. The buyer doesn't necessarily care. The seller doesn't necessarily have to replace it. But I can tell you this, the home inspector is going to point it out. You might as well just deal with that up front. Another thing you may have to deal with is plumbing problems. When you go into a house, you don't typically turn on the water and see how the plumbing works either. You don't flush the commodes, you don't run the bathtub. But let's talk about one of the plumbing problems that I continually run into. In our area, there is a rule about the hot water heater. One rule in many areas is the hot water heater has to be at least 18 inches off of the ground. And in our area, the top of the hot water heater has an escape valve. There's supposed to be an L-shaped piece of PVC pipe that is attached to that escape valve, so that if you hear a noise in the closet, you open the door, you don't get blast of steam in your face. It leads it out and down to the floor, so you can reach through there and you can turn off the water that's going to that hot water heater. It is amazing how many houses I've sold, and the home inspector writes into his report that that piece of PVC pipe is not attached to that escape valve. A lot of times the buyers say, don't worry about it, we'll just put it in when we own the property. And then 5 years later, when they list the property with me and I look in that closet, they still haven't installed that piece of pipe that was there before. Now, another thing we don't normally do is go into a house and test the heating and air conditioning system. We let the home inspector do that also. But, of course, when it's summer, it's too darn hot to turn on the heating anyway to see how it's going. And some people have different types of systems in which it won't kick on until it gets to a certain temperature anyway. So this is another place where we'd have to talk to the owners. A lot of houses have smoke detectors. Some of them are simple little standalone units that have a 9-volt battery. Others of them are wired into the security system in the house. You're going to look for those as well. For years, I carried around an old cane that I found in an abandoned house, and when I went into another house, I would push the button with that cane. If it beeped, I thought the smoke detector worked. But we've had some recent articles in our publications that say just because it beeps when the button is pushed does not mean it will beep when smoke gets into it. Some companies will sell you a testing kit. You put it up there, push a button, it sends out a puff of smoke. If the smoke detector goes off, you know it works properly. Some of you prefer the Marlboro method to testing the smoke detector.